Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for a topic that's clearly on everyone's mind, given the fact that we've had people from all across the United States and even Canada register for today's seminar. We're really excited about that. And of course, today's topic is returning to work in the post-pandemic setting, what that's going to look like and how we're going to go about keeping some of the upsides that we gained from this forced telework experiment that we've all been unwittingly made a part of over the last year and a half. I'm Denise Starling. I'm the executive director of a nonprofit organization based in Atlanta, Georgia, called Livable Buckhead. For those of you in the transportation world, we're the Transportation Management Association for the Buckhead community, which is one of the major activity centers in the city's commercial core. For those of you from out of town, Buckhead has about 90 million square feet of commercial real estate, of which is about 43 million that's multifamily and 23 million of that is office. In addition to that, we also have nearly 6,000 hotel rooms, 1,500 retail outlets, and about 300 dining establishments. Our residential base is just over 101,000 residents, and our workforce includes 294,000 jobs. And the key thing is 92% of those workers come in from somewhere else every day. So as you can imagine, the commute is top of mind for us. So we've put together today a great presentation for you. Our very own mobility services manager, Katie Gable, is going to guide us through some fantastic research that she's compiled and used to create our strategic approach. Then Bob Steinhardt, a CPA with Carr Riggs and Ingram CPAs and Advisors here out of Atlanta, is going to talk about the tax implications of remote and telework. And then finally, Ben Foster with Georgia Commute Options is going to tell you a little bit more about the resources available throughout the Atlanta region. So just a few housekeeping reminders for you. We're all set up in a webinar format today, so attendees will all stay muted throughout the session, but we do encourage you to submit questions for the panelists. You can do that either through the chat or the Q&A function. We'll be monitoring those along the way and incorporating the questions in. We will also be putting links to resources that we reference in the presentation in the chat, so keep an eye out for those. And one of the great things about Zoom and being on Zoom is that I don't have to tell you where the bathrooms are or where to find the fire exits. So we can assume you've all got that covered by now. So again, thank you for joining us today. We're very excited to have you here with us and hope you really get some great ideas and information out of this presentation. At this time, I'd like to turn it over to Katie Gable to start the show. Katie, take it away.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Denise. And again, thanks to all of our attendees for being here today. We're just so excited to be kind of in front of you and giving all of this great information. So I'm going to go ahead and start sharing my screen here. And please let me know, and hopefully everyone can see my presentation, but let me know if you cannot. So again, my name is Katie Gable, and I am the program manager of mobility services with Livable Buckhead. And Denise gave a great introduction to who Livable Buckhead is, and I just wanted to give a little bit more information for anyone who isn't familiar with Livable Buckhead. So in short, really, we are a nonprofit rooted in sustainability and really have a unique focus and mission on enhancing the quality of life and the environment in our Buckhead community. And in 2011, we expanded from just being a transportation management association to incorporating all forms of sustainability programming. So you can see here on the slide that that includes waste management programs, energy and water efficiency, community events, green space building, and much, much more. So we're all over the community all the time. So, and of course, within that suite of programming, I really focus my time on the mobility services. And so that really includes working with the community to reduce our congestion and improve our air quality through the use of alternative modes. And so one of the most effective ways that we're really able to do that is by implementing policies and programs on a company-wide level or through our employer partners. And so before I dive really deep into the presentation today, I wanted to point out two main things. And what I really want to make a note of is that through our whole messaging and throughout this whole process, one of Livable Buckhead's main goals is to not let employers and the business community really forget or lose sight of what we have found throughout this, what we're calling pandemic pilot. We've already all done so much work to figure out the kind of flexibility and the kind of future of the workplace that works for your organization. And so we don't want to lose that. And I want to say congratulations to everybody on making it through an entire year and a half of working from home. You know, some people have started going back, but it really was a large pilot that we all kind of experienced, this worldwide phenomenon. And the COVID-19 pandemic, obviously, we all know it uprooted all of our daily lives in a number of ways. But what really stood out the most to Livable Buckhead were those two main points and two main impacts that I want to mention. And that's the nearly universal move to remote work arrangements and the impacts of those, and then the decrease in our traffic congestion. And again, that's what we don't want to lose sight of, is the benefits that we found throughout those things. So my first point in that is most everyone on this webinar today, I believe, probably experienced the joy of very little, if none at all, traffic during the pandemic, which at some points it might have felt like the apocalypse. But overall, it was really interesting kind of seeing the lack of traffic and congestion that was on our roads. And then my second point here is that what we'll see at the beginning of this presentation, and that's that most people want to keep some sort of flexibility and that little bit of control in place permanently, whether that be even just 1 or 2 or 3 days a week working from home. And you may be wondering why these two things have stood out the most to us. And I think you can all imagine, and some of you may already know, that these two things have a direct impact on each other. They're directly related. Now that people have broken the habit of driving alone to the office every day or just driving everywhere every day, we really need to find ways to lock in as much of that traffic reduction as possible. And one of our main goals and how we want to do that is by helping employers create programs that are sustainable and successful and encourage their employees to continue working from home, even just part-time. And today we're going to look at ways to make that happen. So first, I wanted to take a poll we want to know really what is the biggest challenge or barrier that you've found to implementing a flexible workplace strategy. We assume that a lot of people on this webinar are just looking for more information or trying to figure out maybe a better strategy, but are probably really still running into some challenges to actually getting that done. So this will kind of help us give a good idea of what companies what companies are really struggling with. So I think we'll give that just a few seconds to let people answer, and then we can pull up the results to see what kind of the biggest challenge might be. Maybe we'll just give it a few more seconds and then go ahead and close that poll out. Awesome. Okay, so, well, maybe not awesome, but kind of what I was expecting was concerns over culture and communication is the top challenge that people are facing. And that's what we're seeing across the board and something that we're definitely going to be addressing throughout this presentation, and hope to give you some great ideas on how to move forward. So jumping into the main kind of portion of the presentation, I wanted to take a step back and really look at remind ourselves of what the business community thought of telework or flexibility prior to the pandemic. So while telework had been steadily on the rise in the past several years, it did start to pick up most companies still only use this type of programming as a business continuity strategy in case of emergencies. And if you are familiar with Atlanta, or if you are in the Atlanta area, you know that we're referring to bridge collapses, snow days, and major football games. And only about 20% of Metro Atlanta employees were really allowed to telework on a regular basis about 1 day a week. So many business leaders just really thought that it was going to have a negative impact on their overall bottom line, and especially their employee productivity. But then came March 2020, and the business community that really had been so reluctant to embrace telework rapidly deployed technologies and created more effective remote work arrangements than, especially us experts, really ever thought that would happen. And we all know at this point that there are a plethora of benefits to remote work, especially for employees. And these benefits are just really the tip of the iceberg. There's so much research coming out on a daily basis of the challenges and the benefits of a remote work arrangement. But most notable that I really wanted to point out is that workers really are more productive when they are working from home, or when they're working remote. And we even saw a 10% increase between April of 2020 and April of 2021, thanks to Georgia Commute Options Metro Atlanta-wide survey that they did. Another notable benefit is that the fact that remote workers want to keep flexibility in place because they're saving so much time and so much money and so much stress from the lack of commute. So really just bringing back to that main point at the beginning of this conversation. And on top of that, another hot topic that I think everyone's kind of hearing about a lot right now is attracting talent. 91% of executives believe that they attract more talent when offering remote work. And one of the key messages that I think is important today for us to say is that the most pressing concern for your company or any company right now really should be the risk of losing out on talent, or potentially causing retention issues if you don't keep some sort of flexibility in place long term and make it successful for both your organization and your employees. But of course, there have been challenges. We all have experienced different challenges over the past year and a half. The conditions that we were working in, especially remotely, were anything but normal. We experienced a global pandemic. Many of us were handling virtual schooling. We had very minimal social interactions and a bunch of economic uncertainty that just put extra stresses and worries on all of us. And a new study by Microsoft, their 2021 Work Index study, has even shown a major increase in activity during the pandemic. Over 40 million more emails were sent in February of this year compared to February of last year. But in reality, this high productivity is actually just masking extreme exhaustion. Employees, I'm sure everyone is aware and everyone's experiencing this, this back-to-back messaging and back-to-back meetings. And this is something that companies and employers will have to really take control of and step away from a little bit. The constant emails and expecting that immediate messaging and back-to-back meetings is really just bringing a lot of exhaustion onto employees. And with that, I wanted to mention this new kind of buzzword, which may be a new buzzword for some, maybe not for all, is the idea of this asynchronous communication. And we're going to talk just a little bit about that later, but I wanted to plug that here. So overall, really, leadership and managers and employees are all missing out on the social interactions, and they want to be back in the office and experience some of the same things that we had before. And that's a lot of that creative collaboration and being around and interacting with our coworkers. But as we're already seeing, these challenges aren't permanent. Life is beginning to look a little bit more like a pre-pandemic normal already. Schools are going back in the fall, if they weren't already back in the spring. And companies are starting to send their employees back into the office. Can you imagine how effective our employees and our workforce would be if we were able to keep a little bit of that flexibility, a little bit of that control over our lives in place, and be able to collaborate with our coworkers when we needed to on a weekly basis? I just can't imagine how productive and how happy our employees would be. And our research is showing that employers think that this can happen and that it can work, and that flexibility is actually here to stay. And Microsoft Work Index study, again, showed that 66% of decision makers are considering redesigning their office space to better accommodate hybrid work environments. And on top of that, over 70% of employees want to keep some type of flexibility in place. And multiple surveys and multiple studies are showing that over three-fourths of employees want to continue this flexibility. But we know that the office will remain an integral part of business. The ideal future really, and what we believe is the ideal future will be a balance between an in-office and an at-home or other remote location schedule, and leading to a more flexible workplace. And even commercial real estate experts are expecting the future to really kind of change and go in this direction. And even we saw that even Cushman Wakefield's Brett White calls out that the workplace will no longer be a single location in an office building. It's really going to change, and it's going to evolve into something new, which is really actually an exciting thing. And I think what the workforce and what employers really need to embrace. But the future is right now. We're not waiting for this to happen anymore. It's here and it's now. So I'm sure our title of our webinar is making a little bit more sense right now. And I think what's crazy to me and what I've done and read through my research, and a notable point is that almost a third of companies aren't planning a strategy for their return to the office, rather just going with the flow and back to normal. And that's just crazy to me. And I've heard an even more recent data point that around 60% of companies just haven't communicated a plan to their employees, even if they've put one in place. But that's not what you should be doing right now. We don't want our employers to be just kicking it back and letting it go back to normal. Now is the time to set our workforce up for success and take advantage of the lessons that we've all learned. And if you aren't planning your strategy for the future, you're losing the talent war already. And I bet some of you are probably asking, why now? And some of you may have assumptions. But did you know that 1 out of 3 employees say that they would quit their jobs if their employers no longer allow remote work or any type of flexibility? And if you haven't read it yet, you will soon. People are looking for new jobs. There's a whole world, the labor force is changing. So enhancing and evolving your policies and your culture and your communication is absolutely critical for employers right now. And while many businesses haven't yet communicated a plan, some major ones that I'm sure you've read about are announcing their plans, and they're making major company changes and major changes to their culture and policies by either keeping flexibility in place or expanding what they might have already had in place. And you may have heard of Salesforce, maybe just a small company, and they're actually one of our largest in Buckhead. And their leadership actually used feedback from multiple employee surveys that they facilitated throughout the pandemic that really helped them fine-tune a hybrid work model that fits their business as well as the needs of their workforce. And so that led to kind of 3 categories of workers for them, which is flex, fully remote, and office-based. And we've also talked with other firms that are updating their pre-pandemic policies, some that didn't have any policies in place before, and will continue to allow employees to work from home even just 1 or 2 days a week. But the key here is to communicate with your employees. And I think that's one of my main messages throughout the rest of the presentation is the communication is key. And even if you haven't made a plan yet, even just getting their opinions on what the plan could look like and strategies over time, getting their opinions, I think is really important. And this is one example of Microsoft's communication to their employees on different types of flexibility that work for their business needs and for their employee types. And we know Microsoft is a much bigger company, but it's a great example of just communicating to them. And the key here is to note that it's not a one-size-fits-all approach, and there's going to be different needs for each company and definitely for each employee. But with all this information, what I'm really here to tell you is how you can also create these forward-thinking policies and plan a strategy that really works for your organization. But in order to do this, we have to be proactive and we have to be structured and intentional about our approach and create a structure that supports both the organization and your employees. But this process is not going to be as difficult as you might have thought it would be, maybe even just 2 years ago, if you ever thought about putting a telework program in place. Now, remember, we've already gone through so much and we've learned so much about our employees and about what kind of flexibility or telework program could really work for us if you've been working remotely for the past year. Essentially, the core steps in creating a flexible workplace that can really succeed over the long term include defining what flexibility means at your organization, similar to what Microsoft did, addressing the common challenges and employee needs, identifying job roles and tasks that are suitable for a telework and or remote work for the long term, and lastly, integrating key elements that support a hybrid workforce and really make it work. So really first, I'm going to dive into these steps a little bit. Similar to Microsoft, and not all of those types of flexibility might work for you, but we really need to look at what flexibility can mean and kind of define it. And so flexibility typically in the work environment refers to two different things, and that's time and location. So flexibility in time has historically been an agreement between an employer and an employee on specific core hours or daily timeframes that the employee needs to be in the office. So this historically has allowed for employees to avoid those peak PM and peak AM commute hours. And I think many of us are familiar with this idea and probably have done it ourselves for a very, very long time. And another association that was really birthed out of the pandemic, or maybe just became much more popular out of the pandemic, is this idea of employee shifts, or grouping employees to come in on certain days together. And this type of flexibility in time can really allow for certain teams or departments to be in the office together when they need to collaborate, when they need to have meetings or presentations. And so that can be really key in your strategy. And second, flexibility in location can take two different forms as well. On one hand, flexibility in location can apply to an employee who has the ability, or to the physical work site. So that might be the ability for an employee to work at the office or at home some days, or even some other remote work site. On the other hand, location can apply to where an employee lives, or what Microsoft refers to as geography. And that's really for the ability for a company to hire someone that can actually live in another city or state and fulfill all of their job functions. And nationally, we're seeing this happen. I'm sure all of you have read about the Googles and the Facebooks that are announcing plans to allow employees to work remote indefinitely and maybe not come back to the office once or twice a year. And so while this is rare and we don't foresee this happening for most companies, we are actually seeing this happen on a local level as well. During the pandemic, one of our local employer partners, about a medium-sized employer, decided to actually shift their entire workforce or operations to be fully remote. But we really believe that they were able to do this because they did have previous experiences prior to the pandemic, and they had a policy in place that really allowed for a positive remote work arrangement when it came down to it. So, and this is where you'll want to address different implications for having employees in other states. And you may already be actually experiencing this, even if you don't have a policy or program in place right now. Many employees moved away during the pandemic, as we all have known and read, and many employers are starting to expand their talent pool and looking at employees that may live in other cities or states and nowhere even close to their corporate office. And as we know, tax concerns have actually come up with this new phenomenon of sorts. And we wanted to make sure that we address those concerns. So we decided to bring in our friends at Carr Riggs Ingram CPAs and advisors. So I'm actually going to take a second and hand it over to Bob with CRI to kind of introduce CRI and speak just a minute on this topic. So
Thanks,
Bob,
Kate.
whenever you're ready.
I appreciate it. Thank you so much. So I'm Bob Steinhardt. I am one of the state and local tax team leads for the national CRI firm. We have a large office here in Atlanta of about 250 people. And as I was just saying, the majority of my clientele deals with multi-state taxation. So I felt like I was a great fit for this presentation. Let's just talk a little bit about some of the ramifications that could occur if, as employers look to hire remotely, whether that's partially remote employees or fully remote employees, there could be some significant ramifications tax-wise for them if they're not making sure of what their obligations are with these remote employees. Of course, employers want to be flexible, as Katie was saying, but it's important that they're not opening themselves up to some significant tax costs or even just compliance costs of having remote workers in other states. With the ability to have workers in other states, you could lead to a situation where you are creating what they call nexus. Having nexus requires that a company might have to file payroll or income tax returns in a particular locality. Of course, companies that are here just in Atlanta and they may not have any remote employees, they might have very few multi-state filings. They might have Georgia and maybe a few other states. But if you are adjusting your workforce to fully remote and you have employees in 40 states, you're really opening yourself up to probably being required to file tax returns in those multiple states and or localities. Can you go to the next slide, Katie? So as an example of one of our largest clients is a professional services firm that has 255 partners in multiple states, in 12 states, but none of their employees are currently in the state of Minnesota. Well, they have an employee who is contemplating making the move to Minnesota because they're allowing for fully remote work. Unfortunately, given the fact that they have no other employees in Minnesota, they don't necessarily have tax nexus in that state. But if you have an employee in that state, some of the firm's income, total income, would now be allocable to the state of Minnesota. With that, each partner would be required to file some sort of Minnesota return, either through a combined firm filing or a separate individual tax return. The firm would also be required to file Minnesota payroll tax returns and pay Minnesota payroll taxes. This could lead to some significant costs in terms of taxes, but also a lot of cost and headache in terms of complying with all the different state and local laws that might occur as a result of having income or payroll tax nexus. So the real question becomes, what are the steps to kind of fix this problem? So in looking at the ramifications, there's certainly an approach that we can take to help employers make the right decisions if they're going to allow for fully remote or partially remote employees. The first thing an employer should do is ask their payroll provider to notify them if any of their employees request an address change on their W-2 or on their pay stubs. It's very important that employers are properly communicating with their employees who are remote by sending a quarterly or biannual email, just confirming that their resident state and city that they previously listed is still their resident state or city. Another way, if you suspect that maybe one of your remote employees might be in a state or city that you don't know they're in, is to check their expense reports for a concentration of expenses in locations other than where they have listed as a resident state or city. If an employee has, majority of their expenses in, New York City, but you think they're in, Minnesota or Nebraska, well, you have to ask the question, have they moved to New York City? So, those are the types of things we're looking at and recommending to our clients who are, adjusting to this post-pandemic phase with, remote employees. So, with that, I'm gonna, pass it back to you, Kate.
Thanks so much, Bob. And I'm sure we probably have some questions on that, and we're going to take all the questions at the end. So we appreciate you being with us and kind of talking a little bit on that subject. So I'm going to jump back into the steps to creating a successful, flexible workplace. And so really the next step to address is to address what challenges employees are facing with remote work. And again, communication is key here. And you're going to hear me repeat that multiple times. But the goal really is to listen to your employees, survey them, chat with them, understand what their needs are, really. While we have found common challenges among our research, each employee in each company is going to have unique issues. And again, these flexible programs are not a one-size-fits-all. You'll have to figure out what the challenges are for your company so you can really evolve solutions to meet these new demands. And step 3 is to identify, this might be one of the most important kind of tasks or steps, and that's to identify which roles and tasks are really suitable for telework or remote work for the long run. And here's where your pandemic pilot really comes into play. You've probably already developed a good sense of what types of work for you and maybe for some of your employees or colleagues, what types of work are really easier to do at home with no interactions at all or with minimal interactions, and which tasks maybe require for you to be in person and meet with your colleagues. And likewise, some people may not be well suited to work remote at all. Even some of the time. And you need to factor in important considerations such as experience level, are they a new hire, and their preferences. Some people just don't want to work remotely or telework at all. They like being in the office. So assessing these roles and tasks will really give you, and what we've kind of come up with through our research, is a 3-tiered classification system. And that includes remote workers, flexible workers or flex workers, and traditional office-based workers. And so we're going to look at the definitions of these on the next slide. So Livable Buckhead really believes that most employees, specifically at more traditional companies, maybe not as tech-heavy, will fall into the category of the middle category or flex worker. So these classifications will really further define what strategies best fit your organization. You're going to have to ask questions such as which of your employees can do their entire jobs from home with no interaction, and which job roles really need some time for that in-person collaboration, or who just wants that in-person time, and how many employees need to be in the office every day to really fulfill their job functions. So assessing these and answering these questions can help shape your strategies that will balance your needs for the organization and for the business with employee expectations. Remember, it's a business strategy, not an employee right. So lastly, there are supportive elements that you'll need to implement in order to make a flexible workplace sustainable, really. So we've identified these 5 supportive measures here. but you'll probably run into several other challenges or strategies that you need to put in place for your employees. And for today's presentation, I'm not going to get into the weeds of each of these, but I did want to go into a couple of the main ones. And of course, one of the biggest topics right now, and trying to balance a hybrid work environment is communication and how to keep that going, but not too much. And so a communication strategy is going to be one of the most important tools to have, whether all of your employees are in the office, whether they're at home, or some hybrid of the two. Keeping your teams communicating with each other and engaged with leadership is going to be a little bit more difficult with a hybrid or in a hybrid world, but it's definitely not impossible. Companies will have to use different means to ensure that their employees are staying connected, such as the traditional team building activities and some more innovative ideas. However, I wanted to go back to this idea of the asynchronous communication that I mentioned. And this will be just as important as synchronous communication. And just to give a little bit of a definition around that, asynchronous communication is when you send a message or an email without expecting an immediate response. And so I think that's one thing that we've all become accustomed to during this past year and a half of everyone working remotely, is that we're always online and we're always on these meetings and constantly communicating. And that real-time communication is absolutely necessary, and we're going to have to, it's definitely needed, but we might have to take a step back and set our specific agendas for meetings and eliminate unnecessary ones. And really, we're going to have to remind ourselves when working in a hybrid world that some people who are working remotely or teleworking on those certain days may not respond as immediately as someone who is in the office. So, and that's a key strategy that businesses are going to have to balance, that will just really enhance the communication between employees and coworkers. And another thing I wanted to mention here is that culture it's no longer really just about beer and kombucha on tap anymore, or the ping pong tables or the foosball tables downstairs. As some employees come back into the office and some remain on a hybrid schedule, the fundamentals of your company culture will have to be really visible or seen in a new way. And the fundamentals of a company culture are having the same values and solving problems together, really enjoying spending time with each other. And that's where it's going to be important for employers moving forward to think about how they can create those opportunities and create the office space that really encourages for this to happen, that social interaction. That's what people really want. And the traditional thought of being in a cubicle and just being at a desk for 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, that's not company culture. And with that, again, communication is going to be key. Clear communication will only enable you to create more engaged employees and really help boost that company culture. And a general toolkit that I kind of really wanted to point out today includes these three things, and that's transparency, creating trust and encouraging multiple lines of communication that not only allows for employees to talk and communicate and connect, but allows for leaders and managers to be open and honest with each other. It's really a huge and one of the first components of a strong culture. Even asking for input from employees on what they like about culture, what they like about the strategies and things in place right now will even create stronger ties. And the second is this, or rituals or routines. And so that's managers and leaders setting expectations for the communication. And that's thinking about balancing the asynchronous with synchronous communication, and implementing weekly stand-up meetings or check-ins, even idea sharing, surveys and peer reviews, and much, much more. There are so many tools that you can have in your back pocket. And lastly, the infrastructure. Ensuring you have the technology and the tools in place to take full advantage of your communication strategy will, of course, be one of the most important parts of keeping a hybrid workforce communicating and connected. So another element of supporting a hybrid workforce that I really wanted to focus on today, because it's such an important topic for Livable Buckhead and the Atlanta area, is the idea of this suite of options that employees have to get to the office. Now, this graphic shows you what we believe and what many other experts around the country are growing or are believing or do believe, is that the future of commuting, what it will look like. And that's also flexibility. People's activities and behaviors are different every day, especially now. And the options that they have to commute can be different every day too. They don't have to be the same. Just like remote work though, there's no one size fits all. People will need more flexible options and support for those options when trying to get around. And remember at the beginning of the presentation, we discussed why continuing remote work is a major part to keeping our congestion down. However, it's not the only part. One of the main reasons workers want to keep telework in place, as we saw, is because they're saving so much time and money and really the lack of stress from not commuting. So why should we not help them keep as much time and money saved as possible? Because we believe most employees will be in that middle category of flex workers, we really need to provide them with more, with the support that makes a flexible, stress-free commute really an option. And Livable Buckhead, GCO, and many other TMAs, as we mentioned, around the country and in Atlanta especially, have for decades helped employers implement programs that really make it easier for employees to come into work with those stress-free alternatives. However, most of those programs are really designed to support traditional office-based workers who need to go into the office every single day. But as we've seen, and as we're constantly seeing on a daily basis, the workforce is changing. And what we don't want, and what we definitely don't need, is for everyone to drive alone to work when they start going back in, or as they start going back in. So, and this flexibility in commuting will look different for everyone, but there are lots of solutions that can be put in place on the employer level to really support the different options. And that can look like 10 or 20 trip transit passes, daily parking, part-time parking, even cash rewards for people when they bike or walk to work, and much, much more. And Livable Buckhead, we, as I mentioned, have helped employers for decades on implementing these programs. And we're really here to help companies get through this process, put in the plans and the strategies that make sense for their organization and the benefits that really work for them. And with our expert guidance and our customizable materials, we really believe that employers can embrace this new workforce that's coming, or that's already here, because the future is now. And so our services really specifically help businesses in our Buckhead community. But as I mentioned, and as we introduced, GCO, Georgia Commute Options, helps all around the Metro Atlanta area, and other TMAs as well are in the Atlanta area. And so I wanted to introduce Ben Foster, GCO's Manager of Outreach and Employer Services, who is here to talk just a little bit more about GCO and some of their new employer resources.
Thank you, Katie. So there's a link that was dropped in the chat. Feel free to click on it. I'm going to share my screen briefly just so you get an idea of where the GCO territory is. So if you see here to my right, Georgia, my name is Ben Foster, Manager of Outreach and Employer Services for Georgia Commute Options. We are a program of the Atlanta Regional Commission. We're funded by Georgia Department of Transportation, and we're here to serve you. Right here in this map, you can see we serve the 20-county metro region. And then you can also see our TMA partners like Livable Buckhead. So we, like Katie mentioned, flexibility of the future. We saw during the pandemic pilot, portion of the workforce did switch to working remotely. We learned a lot we were able to get resources out to folks, and I want to share these resources with you. So also in the chat, you have this link. You can download our Finding Balance brochure. You can have a work from home care package for your employees. And you can also see the COVID-19 commute impact report for the region. And these are all resources that are intended to help you and support your programs. And also there's our contact information there. So you can access our free services and talk to us, or we could direct you to the appropriate TMA or program for your company. Finally, and if I can move this box here, excuse me, there we go. So Katie did reference a few of some survey findings. Some of those were from the regional survey that we conducted since last April when the pandemic began. And this really does support the story that Katie is telling. And again, this is going to be dropped in. You can download this and share it. But it is supporting the idea that flexibility is the future. Not only did we see the positives, if you look down here where you see the little green plus signs, but then you also see the red negative signs. So we did see those challenges. Groups like Livable Buckhead and GTO, we tried our best to respond to those challenges, and we're going to continue to help serving you as you are shifting towards hybrid work or any program that works best for your organization. So thank you so much, Katie. And if you need anything, just feel free to contact me.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Ben. I'm going to pull back up my screen so I can share our information. We have about 10 minutes left, I know. So I wanted to pull up our contact information for everyone to have and to see. And I wanted to see if there were any questions in the chat that we can address with our few minutes that we have left. So I don't see any questions in here now, but we can give it a couple minutes and see if anybody wants to throw a question up in there, wow, into the chat box. So we have several minutes if we want to. And I do have a question actually for Bob, and that is, what are some things that employers can do to stay in compliance?
So thanks, Katie. I spoke a little bit about it before, but what you guys were talking about, truly communicate with your employees is really the most important piece of this. If your employees' living situations, where they are, whether they've moved, whether they want to be fully remote, partially remote, get their feelings on all of that, then, you can really kind of improve your situation tax-wise and, not run into, a tax surprise, and you really want to try and avoid, if employees are telling you where they want to work and you approve it, it's fine, that's great, you're not surprised by it. But if they, end up living someplace where they have now created a situation where you might have to file taxes there, that can create some real headaches. So communication is key.
Great advice, thank you. This is an interesting one, I think. Are the taxing authorities being more lenient because of the situation that we're in?
So, it's funny you asked that. The answer, like many attorneys or CPAs will tell you, is it depends. Here in the state of Georgia, if your company is another state and you happen to be telecommuting from Georgia, the state of Georgia Department of Revenue has stated that there'll be a bit more lenient in terms of, having a telework employee creating nexus in another state. But there are a lot of states that surround Georgia that, are treating it as business as usual. So if we have a formerly Atlanta-based employee and now they're living, let's say down at the beach, in Florida. Well, that has now given you Florida nexus because Florida is, treating telework employees as Florida employees. Yeah, the state of Florida has, historically for a very long time, tried to impute nexus or require out-of-state filers to file payroll tax or other state tax returns there because they don't have a state income tax and they need to raise revenue in other ways. So, one of the things that employers should be doing is they find out an employee is working somewhere or wanting to work somewhere, get in contact with your CPA or your tax professional to make sure that you're aware of the ramifications because every state unfortunately is different, and when it comes to state and local taxes most states differ in certain ways. So it's very important to have that conversation with your CPA.
Great, thank you. We did have another question come in the chat for Ben, actually. Do you have any data on VMT reductions during the pandemic? A recent SANDAG survey of employees in the San Diego region found that there were still trips made, so telework may not be as optimal as it was originally perceived. Do we have any data like that for the Atlanta area?
We do have data, but I don't have it on the website or at my fingertips, but we certainly do have data. And I'd love to connect with Deborah. She can shoot me an email. But the story told in the middle of the pandemic was, the peak hour commutes were down. And then we steadily saw VMT rising as the pandemic was dragging on, but peak hour commutes were still down. That's changing now. We don't need, you can kind of see the 85. There's more traffic now in the morning and the evening. And so I think in terms of it not being optimal, I am going to push back on that because any type of percent change, percent reduction in peak hour congestion is good because it's congestion that does create the air quality conditions that we're trying to eliminate, right? The poor air quality conditions. So we do want to get that peak hour congestion down. Telework is certainly a way to do it. And just, people moving towards more of a hybrid workforce is one way to do it. But Deborah, I definitely can get some data for you. Feel free to shoot me an email and I can assist you.
Great. Thanks so much, Ben. Another question actually back on the taxes. Do the tax implications extend to individuals filing their own taxes as well? Would I have to do 2 state tax forms as an employee?
So unfortunately, the answer to that is maybe. It really kind of depends on where the telework employee is working. If they are now a full-time Florida resident, well, Florida doesn't have state income tax. Same thing with Tennessee. But if they've moved to California and they're now a California resident and the employer says it's okay that they live in California, well, you're going to have California income and you may no longer have Georgia income. So you might, your income might be completely California as an employee, but let's say you are a partner or you are an owner in some way in this business. Well, if you're teleworking, you could create all types of liabilities for your other partners or the other owners of the company. So the answer to that is, unfortunately, it depends, but it's something that you should be thinking about if you're going to be working remotely.
Great, thank you. I think we have time. We'll answer one more question from Kenneth. Ben, and help me jump in if you have any thoughts on this one too. But he asked, what suggestions do we have for managing work from home situations that involve a blending of workplace and employee provided resources, such as computers and printers and other kind of physical technology aspects of that? So I'll just say we've seen that happen different for each company. It depends on the policies that you have in place and what the employer can provide. And a lot of employers are moving towards a stipend. So just providing, you know, $100 or so to employees and not providing, you know, the physical equipment. So that just depends on the employer budget and the employer policy that has been put in place.
Yeah, and I guess just from a situation that I saw was I found during the pandemic for those organizations and companies that had staff laptops that had docking stations, it was easy to transfer them between, you know, home and office. And then so when the pandemic did happen, it wasn't so much like we got to get everyone a laptop. It was like, okay, we just have to get folks docking stations. And so I think that was something where I saw people transitioning back and forth between home and work. I know it's not the best answer,
Yeah,
but it was a real simple one when it happened.
And there is some organizations don't allow employees to print anything at home. That's another policy that you could put in place if you don't want to have to provide the ink and all the paper and the things that come with that. That could be an issue that comes up. So you can just say no. You know, if it is, it's on their own. And so those are types of policies and kind of things and that's why we really think a structured or more formalized kind of guidelines should be put in place so you can address those questions to your employees and especially new hires. So thank you again. I think that's about time. Thank you again to all of our attendees today. Please reach out to us if you have any questions or if you're ready to kind of tackle a more formal or create a more structured, successful program for you all, for your organization. So we're so thankful everyone joined us today, and we look forward to seeing you again soon.